Ever feel like there's a whole other you lurking beneath the surface?
Hmm.
Like that perfectly curated online persona you present is only half the story.
Right.
Well, get ready to dive deep because today we're exploring the fascinating world of shadow work.
Yes.
We're about to unpack this idea of a shattered self,
Okay.
what it is,
Yeah.
why it matters, and how understanding it can unlock some serious personal growth. We've got a stack of sources here, blending psychology, personal stories, and even a little pop culture, so buckle up.
Yeah, and it's not about dwelling on negativity or unleashing some dark side.
Right.
Think of it more as shining a light on those hidden parts of ourselves
Right.
that we've been taught to ignore or suppress.
Exactly. And I love a good real life story,
Mhm.
and our sources kick things off with a fascinating one.
Yeah.
Apparently, this whole concept of shadow work was basically pioneered by a woman named Debbie Ford.
Okay.
She had this incredible life on paper, a
Mm.
successful career,
Right.
tons of friends, but behind the scenes, she
Mhm.
was battling addiction
Mhm.
and engaging in some seriously self-destructive behaviors.
It's amazing how often we see this, right?
Oh, yeah.
That dissonance between the face we show the world
Right.
and the internal struggles we face privately.
Yeah.
What's so compelling about Debbie's story is that it was actually hitting rock bottom
Wow.
that led her to this concept of the shadow self.
So walk us through this. What exactly did she do?
Well, through therapy and a lot of introspection, she started to confront those aspects of herself that she'd been pushing down for years. The anger,
Ah.
the shame, the insecurities, all the things she deemed unacceptable.
Right, right.
And she began to realize that these repressed parts of ourselves
Mm,
don't just magically disappear.
right.
They can manifest in unhealthy behaviors, holding us back in ways we might not even realize.
Oh, 100%. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
Okay.
You can struggle to keep it submerged, but it's going to pop up somewhere else, often with more force than before.
That's a great analogy. And to really understand where the shadow fits into all of this,
Okay.
our sources introduce this framework of Jungian archetypes.
Okay.
You've got the ego,
Mm-hmm.
the anima,
Yeah.
animus the self, and then, of course, the shadow.
Okay, let's break those down. The ego, if I'm remembering correctly, is essentially the mask we present to the world, right? That curated version of ourselves we want others to see.
Exactly. It's that carefully constructed image we present,
Right.
often shaped by societal expectations and our desire for approval.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the anima animus, which represent those opposite gender traits we all carry within us.
So like the feminine energy in a man and the masculine energy in a woman.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And all of these aspects are part of what Jung called the self, with a capital S, that unified whole of our conscious and unconscious selves.
Okay.
And then we have the shadow.
Right.
Now, this is where things get interesting, because it's often painted as the dark side, the repository for all the parts of ourselves we deem unacceptable or difficult to face.
So it's not inherently bad, it's just unintegrated. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, imagine growing up in a family where anger was viewed as unacceptable.
Mm.
You might learn to repress that anger, to push it down into the shadows.
Right.
But that doesn't mean the anger disappears.
Right.
It might show up later in life as passive aggression or sudden outbursts, even if you don't fully understand where it's coming from.
That makes so much sense. So how do we actually pinpoint our own shadow stuff?
Yeah.
What are the signs?
Our sources suggest a really interesting exercise.
Okay.
Pay close attention to what triggers you in other people.
Mm.
They say that what we dislike in others
Yeah.
often reflects something we dislike or fear within ourselves.
Oh, I like that. So for example, if I get incredibly annoyed by someone who's always late,
Right.
it might mean that I have some underlying anxiety around time management or maybe a fear of being perceived as unreliable myself.
You got it. And the key here is to approach this from a place of curiosity, not judgment.
Right.
It's about using those triggers as clues to understand your own hidden depths.
This has me thinking about all those recurring patterns in my own life. Like, why do I always do this? Maybe it's my shadow trying to get my attention.
Right.
But how do we move beyond simply identifying it? How do we actually work with this shadow?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't
That's
it?
right.
Our sources dive into this idea of consistency bias
Okay.
and how clinging to a fixed identity can actually sabotage our growth.
Right.
Like, they use the example of returning to your childhood home
Yeah.
or hanging out with old friends from high school.
Okay, I know exactly what you mean. It's like you revert right back to old versions of yourself.
Yeah.
Almost as if those environments hold those past identities in place.
Precisely. And this doesn't just apply to physical spaces.
Right.
We can get stuck in mental and emotional patterns as well.
Right. So if I'm picking up what you're putting down,
Yeah.
it's like even if I've consciously tried to set healthier boundaries,
Right.
that old pattern of people pleasing might resurface.
If I'm hanging out with friends
Yeah.
from a time when that was my go-to move.
Exactly. This is where our sources bring in this wild concept of pendulums, basically energy structures shaped by collective thought patterns
Okay.
or beliefs.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Break that down for me. What do these pendulums do?
Think of it like this. We're surrounded by these invisible forces, these pendulums that can either lift us up or drag us down.
Mm-hmm.
A positive pendulum could be something like a supportive group of friends all striving for similar goals,
Right.
like a mastermind group.
Okay.
On the flip side,
Yeah.
a negative one might be that gossipy group chat that thrives on drama. It keeps everyone stuck in a cycle of negativity.
So then how do we break free from those negative pendulums?
Yeah.
Especially if they're connected to, say, family or longtime friends, those relationships are tough to navigate.
It's definitely not easy. It takes a lot of courage to walk your own path, even if that means going against the grain or potentially ruffling some feathers. It's funny because our sources actually point to influencers as an example here.
Yeah.
They argue that while influencers are often seen as unpredictable,
Right.
they're actually masters at following their own path, even if it means breaking societal norms.
I can see that.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because they're not afraid to contradict themselves or challenge the status quo.
Right.
And that's what makes them stand out.
Yeah.
They're constantly evolving.
Right.
And that resonates with people.
That totally ties into this next concept our sources bring up, embracing opposites.
Yes.
Which feels very counterintuitive. It's like we're constantly bombarded with messages about self-improvement, but this is saying we need to embrace the messy parts too.
It's a total paradigm shift. We get so caught up in striving for this ideal version of ourselves,
Right.
what we think goodness looks like,
Right.
that we reject anything that doesn't fit the image.
Right.
And you know what?
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
It's like we're all trying to curate this perfect Instagram feed of our lives, which we know is not reality.
Precisely. And it's in those hidden, messy parts where our true potential lies.
Okay.
In fact, our sources use a classic literary example to illustrate this, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Ooh, okay. I'm curious. How does that story connect to shadow work?
Well, remember how obsessed Dr. Jekyll becomes with suppressing what he sees as his dark side?
Right.
And it ultimately leads to the creation of Mr. Hyde, who eventually takes over.
Right.
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of denying or repressing parts of ourselves.
Okay.
The more we try to push those aspects down,
Yeah.
the more power we give them.
So it's not about letting our shadow selves run wild,
Yeah.
but about acknowledging they exist and understanding the role they play, kind of like integrating them into the wholeness of who we are.
Exactly. It's about moving from this fragmented sense of self to a more holistic one,
Right.
where we embrace the full spectrum of who we are, light and shadow. And that makes me think about how we deal with all those less than fun emotions. It seems like our instinct is to either bottle them up, pretend they're not there,
Yeah.
or let them explode in unhealthy ways.
100%. And honestly, neither option is great.
Yeah.
Our sources actually outline 4 main approaches to dealing with difficult emotions.
Right.
Repression,
Mm-hmm.
suppression, expression, and surrender.
Okay, break those down for me.
So repression, we've talked about that, right? Like it's like sweeping those icky emotions under the rug, pretending they don't exist.
Right.
Suppression is similar, but maybe a bit more conscious, like I'll deal with this later when I have the time and energy.
Makes sense.
Then there's expression, which is just letting it all out, which, hey, can be cathartic,
Right.
but also messy if not channeled appropriately.
Right. Right.
But here's the kicker. Our sources say that the most effective approach,
Okay.
though often the most difficult,
Mm-hmm.
is surrender.
Okay, I'm ready to be challenged. What does surrendering to those tough emotions actually look like in real life?
Good question. It's about changing our relationship with those uncomfortable feelings from one of resistance to acceptance.
Okay.
And listen, it doesn't mean we have to like those feelings,
Right.
but rather just allowing them to be present without judgment. So instead of trying to outrun anxiety or stuff down anger,
Yeah.
we just sit with it.
Right.
Let ourselves feel it fully. And that's how we move through it. It feels so counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? Our sources actually compare it to trying to resist checking your phone.
Right.
The more you try to fight that urge,
Right.
the stronger it gets.
Right.
But if you can just observe the urge without giving in,
Right.
eventually loses its grip on you.
Wow, that analogy really hits home.
Right.
I can totally relate to that urge to check my phone and how hard it is to resist.
Right.
So, to bring it back to shadow work, this surrender thing, it's like
Yeah.
we're building a muscle, getting better at handling those tougher emotions.
Absolutely. It's like we're rewiring our brains,
Okay,
creating new pathways to respond to those feelings.
right.
And the more we practice,
Yeah.
the stronger those new pathways become.
Okay, so we're getting better at handling the tough stuff.
Yes.
But what happens when we actually surrender to those feelings? What's on the other side?
Now that's where things get really interesting. Our sources talk about something called irrational synthesis, which occurs when we let go of the need to overthink or control everything with logic.
I'll admit, that sounds a bit mystical.
Yeah.
Can you give me a real-world example of this irrational synthesis in action?
Well, imagine you're wrestling with a difficult decision,
Okay.
and you've been analyzing it from every angle,
Mm-hmm.
but you're still stuck. You're getting nowhere fast.
Right.
Then you finally decide to just let go,
Yeah.
to sleep on it.
Okay.
And suddenly, the next morning, the answer just comes to you.
Right.
It's like a flash of insight, that aha moment.
Yeah.
And it often leads to a more creative and fulfilling outcome
Wow.
than you could have logically planned for.
I've totally been there, those breakthrough moments when you're like, wait, how did I not see that before?
Right.
And it sounds like this kind of surrender is key to unlocking those moments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where shadow work gets truly exciting.
Okay.
Because as we integrate those repressed parts of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
we tap into this wellspring of creativity, resilience, and authenticity that we never even knew we had.
So it's not just about healing old wounds or resolving inner conflict.
Right.
It's about unlocking a whole new level of personal growth and potential.
Precisely. It's about becoming a more complete and integrated version of ourselves.
This has been an incredible deep dive, but I know it's a lot to digest.
Right.
For our listeners who are ready to explore this more, where should they start?
Yeah.
What's one concrete step they can take today?
Start by paying attention to those moments when you feel triggered. Ask yourself, what is it about this person or situation that's pushing my buttons?
Mm-hmm.
Those emotional reactions are like breadcrumbs leading you back to your own shadow.
That's a great reminder. And remember, it's not about judging ourselves for having their shadows.
Right.
It's about bringing them into the light of awareness.
Exactly. And I'd add that finding support, whether it's a therapist, coach, or even a trusted friend,
Right.
can make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's valuable to have a safe space to process these insights and work
Yeah.
through those tougher emotions.
Absolutely. It's a journey, not a race.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the shadow self, remember this. Embracing your wholeness, even those messy hidden parts,
Yes.
is where your true power lies.
Mhm.
It's about recognizing that you are not your shadow,
Right.
but it holds valuable keys to unlocking your full potential.
Yes.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this provocative closing thought.
Okay.
If our shadow selves are comprised of these repressed aspects,
Yes,
these
here.
disowned parts of ourselves,
Yeah.
what does it say about our potential for growth and transformation when we choose to integrate them instead of denying their existence?
Mm-hmm.
That's something to ponder as you continue on your own journey of self-discovery.
Right.
Until next time, happy diving.